The funeral parlor smelled like cheap carnations and broken dreams. Evelyn Carter adjusted her black dress for the 100th time today. Her weathered hands trembled as she stared at Harold's casket. 67 years old and burying the only man who ever loved her. The room buzzed with whispered condolences that felt hollow as tin cans. Marcus stood near the back wall, checking his diamond Rolex again. Her oldest son wore a $15,000 suit to his father's funeral. Derek paced by the window, his military posture cracking under invisible weight. Both her boys looked more concerned about parking meters than their daddy. Evelyn approached the casket where white lilies cascaded like frozen tears. Something crinkled beneath the flowers when she adjusted Harold's favorite tie. A folded piece of paper, yellowed and worn, hidden among the petals. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable after 43 years of marriage. Harold's chicken scratch that she'd teased him about since their wedding day. "Don't trust anyone, especially the boys," the note whispered in Harold's voice. "I'm alive, but they think I'm dead. Meet me tonight." Evelyn's knees buckled, and she gripped the casket's cold metal edge. The funeral director rushed over with his practiced expression of manufactured concern. "Mrs. Carter, are you all right?" he asked while eyeing his expensive watch. She stuffed the note deep into her purse like contraband evidence. "Fine. Just saying goodbye to my husband?" she lied through clenched teeth. But Harold couldn't be alive when she'd identified his mangled body yesterday. The memory flashed back like lightning splitting a summer sky. 27 years ago, Harold and Evelyn lived in a cramped garage apartment. They shared $60 grocery budgets and dreams bigger than their wallets. Harold worked double shifts at the steel mill, grease under his fingernails. Evelyn cleaned houses for rich folks who treated her like furniture. But every night they'd sit on their sagging couch sharing stories. Harold would massage her aching feet after her 16-hour cleaning marathons. They'd plan their future over instant coffee and day-old donuts. "We're gonna give those boys everything we never had," Harold promised. And they did, scraping together college funds from their meager paychecks. Marcus graduated Harvard Business School with honors and zero gratitude. Derek earned his military commission but came home carrying invisible scars. Both sons built lives that had no room for their struggling parents. The garage apartment became too expensive when Harold's hours got cut. They moved to a smaller place, then smaller still, always downsizing. Marcus bought his third mansion while his parents ate ramen noodles. Derek gambled away his military pension at Atlantic City poker tables. Last Christmas, Marcus suggested they sell the house for assisted living. "Just temporary," he'd said, "until we figure out your financial situation." But Evelyn knew her son saw dollar signs where love should live. Harold had grown suspicious of their sudden interest in family finances. He'd started asking questions about life insurance policies and inheritance laws. 3 weeks ago, Harold went to Murphy's garage for a brake inspection. The mechanic called that evening with news that shattered their world. Freak accident, carbon monoxide leak. Harold was unconscious when they found him. He died en route to St. Mary's Hospital at exactly 6:47 p.m. No warning signs, no mechanical failures, just terrible luck, they said. But Harold was careful, methodical, suspicious of coincidences and quick fixes. He would never ignore safety protocols or work alone after hours. The insurance investigator spent exactly 27 minutes examining the scene. Case closed, accidental death. Policy pays out $200,000. Marcus handled all the paperwork with unseemly efficiency and corporate precision. Derek seemed relieved that Daddy's suffering was finally over for good. Neither son asked how their mother was coping with sudden widowhood. Now this note suggested Harold was alive somewhere, hiding from someone. Evelyn glanced across the room at Marcus, counting funeral expenses. His cold blue eyes never showed warmth, even as a child. Derek stood rigid by the window, haunted by more than war. His gambling debts had grown beyond his military disability checks lately. $200,000 would solve a lot of problems quickly. But surely her own flesh and blood couldn't murder their father. The funeral director announced the final viewing before closing the casket. Evelyn approached Harold's still form, searching for signs of life. His chest remained motionless beneath the cheap funeral home suit. This was definitely Harold, complete with the scar from his appendectomy. But the note burned in her purse like a lit cigarette. She leaned close and whispered, "Harold, if you're out there somewhere, I'll find you, even if it kills me trying." Marcus appeared beside her with his lawyer's practiced sympathy face. "Mom, we need to discuss the insurance money and estate arrangements. There are tax implications and investment opportunities to consider immediately." Derek joined them, fidgeting with his military funeral flag nervously. "Dad would want us to be practical about his final gift." Evelyn stared at both her sons, seeing strangers wearing familiar faces. The boys she'd raised had been replaced by calculating, cold-hearted men. If Harold was right about not trusting anyone, especially family, then the man who killed her husband might share her blood. She looked directly at the funeral director's security camera above. "If this note is real, then everything I believed was a lie. And the truth might destroy what's left of my broken family." The note felt like fire in Evelyn's trembling fingers. She locked herself in the funeral home bathroom, hands shaking violently. Memories crashed over her like waves against a breaking seawall. 30 years ago, Marcus was 8, and Derek barely 4. Their apartment was cramped but filled with Harold's booming laughter. Every morning, Harold kissed her forehead and called her Sunshine. "Good morning, Sunshine," he'd whisper while tying his steel-toed boots. She'd pack his lunch in yesterday's bread bags and worn thermoses. 2 bologna sandwiches, a bruised apple, and all her love. Evelyn worked 3 cleaning jobs to afford Marcus's school supplies. Her hands cracked from bleach, but her heart swelled with pride. Harold picked up weekend shifts loading trucks at the shipping yard. Double overtime meant Christmas presents under their crooked plastic tree. Marcus earned straight A's and dreamed of Harvard Business School. Derek drew pictures of soldiers and practiced marching around their kitchen. "We're building something bigger than ourselves," Harold would say proudly. "These boys are going to change the world with their opportunities." The kitchen table wobbled but held their nightly family dinners. Mac and cheese, canned green beans, and dreams served generously. Marcus would describe his future empire of gleaming office towers. Derek planned military strategies with his plastic army men battalions. Harold listened like their words were pure gold and precious diamonds. "You boys remember where you came from," he'd remind them gently. "Family means everything when the world tries to break you." But Harvard changed Marcus into someone they barely recognized anymore. He returned home wearing expensive suits and speaking in corporate jargon. The boy who once hugged them daily now offered firm handshakes. Success poisoned his heart like antifreeze in sweet summer tea. Military service changed Derek too, but in darker, more troubling ways. He came back jumpy, drinking heavily, avoiding crowded spaces completely. The nightmares made him scream Harold's name in terrified desperation. But instead of seeking comfort, he pushed his family away. Both sons moved out without backward glances or grateful tears. Marcus built his real estate empire on calculated ruthlessness and ambition. Derek gambled away his pain at Atlantic City poker tables. Neither called on birthdays or holidays or their anniversary celebrations. 5 years ago, the financial pressure became a suffocating weight. Harold's steel mill closed permanently, taking his pension with it. Evelyn's arthritis made cleaning houses an excruciating daily torture. Their modest mortgage payments stretched beyond their dwindling retirement savings. Marcus arrived one December morning in his black luxury sedan. He wore a $1,000 overcoat and practiced expressions of false concern. "Mom, Dad, we need to discuss your unsustainable financial situation. This house is bleeding money you simply don't have anymore." Derek stood behind his brother like a broken shadow puppet. His military posture couldn't hide the desperation in his bloodshot eyes. The gambling debts had grown beyond his disability check capacity. "We found a nice assisted living facility," Marcus continued smoothly. "Clean rooms, medical staff, activities, everything you could want. But first, we need to liquidate this property for everyone's benefit." Harold's face turned red with barely controlled paternal rage and disappointment. "This is our home, son, not some business transaction asset. Your mother planted those roses. I built that back porch swing. Every board and nail holds 40 years of love and memories." Marcus slammed contracts on their kitchen table like courtroom evidence. "Just sign it, Dad. Once this house sells, we'll move forward. The numbers don't lie about your dire financial circumstances here." Evelyn studied the legal documents through tears of pure heartbreak. Everything they'd built would disappear with her trembling signature stroke. Harold resisted, but creditors were already circling like patient vultures. The mortgage company had started foreclosure proceedings last month anyway. At least this way they'd get something instead of losing everything. Evelyn's signature blurred through tears that wouldn't stop flowing freely. Her name looked foreign on papers that stole their lifetime. Marcus collected the contracts with business-like efficiency and cold satisfaction. "Great. I'll have movers here next weekend for your belongings." He left without hugging them goodbye or acknowledging their sacrifice. Derek lingered by the door, guilt written across his features. "Thanks, Mom, Dad. This really helps my situation significantly right now." His words felt hollow as empty beer bottles and broken promises. After both sons left, Harold pulled Evelyn into his arms. His embrace felt like home, even as their house slipped away. "As long as we have each other, sunshine, home is wherever. Wherever we stand together, that's where love lives eternally." His words wrapped around her heart like warm quilts and protection. They'd survived poverty, raised successful sons, built something beautiful together. But success had poisoned their children's hearts against family loyalty. Money became more important than the people who sacrificed everything. Now, in this funeral bathroom, Harold's note suggested something sinister. Had their sons grown desperate enough to commit the ultimate betrayal? The insurance money would solve Marcus's expansion problems and Derek's debts. $200,000 split between two increasingly selfish sons. Evelyn stared at her reflection in the cracked funeral home mirror. The woman looking back had aged decades in just hours. Harold's sunshine had been replaced by someone haunted and suspicious. If her husband was truly alive somewhere, hiding from someone, then everything she believed about their family was completely wrong. The sweet boys, who once drew her Mother's Day cards, had grown into men capable of murdering their own father, for money that would disappear as quickly as their childhood innocence. The phone call came at 6:47 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday. Evelyn was heating leftover soup when Murphy's garage called frantically. "Mrs. Carter, there's been a terrible accident at the shop. Your husband was working late on a brake inspection job. Fuel tank explosion. Carbon monoxide leak. We're so sorry, ma'am." The words hit her like sledgehammers against fragile glass windows. Harold never worked alone after hours. It violated every safety protocol. He drilled those rules into her head for 30 years. Never trust a silent garage. Always work with a buddy. But the mechanic insisted Harold had volunteered for overtime work. Said he needed extra money for some urgent family expenses. That made no sense because Harold never mentioned financial emergencies. The ambulance rushed him to St. Mary's Hospital emergency room. But Harold was already gone, pronounced dead at 7:23 p.m. Evelyn arrived to find his body covered by sterile white sheets. The explosion had burned most of his face beyond recognition. Only his wedding ring and cracked leather wallet confirmed his identity. She held his cold hand and whispered goodbye to empty air. The funeral director arrived with paperwork and practiced condolences immediately. Marcus handled all arrangements with unseemly efficiency and corporate precision. He knew exactly which mortuary to call and what services. Derek nodded along but seemed relieved the suffering was over. Neither son asked how she felt about losing her soulmate. 3 days later, Commonwealth Insurance called with shocking news unexpectedly. "Mrs. Carter, we're processing your husband's life insurance claim today." Harold had upgraded his policy just 2 weeks before the accident. The payout increased from $50,000 to $200,000. Evelyn dropped the phone like it was molten metal burning. Harold never mentioned upgrading any insurance policies to her knowledge. They discussed every financial decision together for 43 years religiously. Even grocery store purchases required consultation and careful budget planning. Why would he suddenly double their life insurance without discussion? She called Marcus immediately, hands trembling with growing suspicious dread. "Son, did Daddy mention anything about changing his insurance policy?" Marcus paused too long before answering with calculated corporate smoothness. "Mom, Dad probably wanted to surprise you with better coverage. You know how he worried about leaving you financially secure." But Harold's surprises were usually flowers or her favorite chocolate. Not major financial decisions that affected their entire retirement planning. Evelyn drove to First National Bank the next morning anxiously. She requested statements for their joint checking and savings accounts. The numbers made her stomach drop like a broken elevator. Strange withdrawals appeared over the past 3 months without explanation. 500 here, 800 there, always in cash transactions. Harold never took large cash withdrawals without telling her first. Every penny had been accounted for since their wedding day. She confronted Marcus again with the bank statements as evidence. "Son, where did this money go? Your father never mentioned." Marcus barely glanced at the papers before dismissing her concerns. "Mom, you're imagining things. Dad probably had his reasons privately. Just let it go and focus on healing from grief." Derek echoed his brother's sentiment with military-trained, dismissive efficiency. "Dad's gone, Mom. Dwelling on details won't bring him back. You need to accept what happened and move forward peacefully." But Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Harold's death felt too convenient, too perfectly timed somehow mysteriously. That night, she searched through Harold's personal belongings carefully. His toolbox held the usual wrenches, screwdrivers, and safety manuals. But tucked behind his insurance papers was his work notebook. 40 pages of grease, stained observations, and mechanical problem-solving notes. Harold documented everything from oil changes to transmission repairs meticulously. The final entries made her blood freeze in her veins. March 15th, Marcus asking about life insurance policy amounts again. March 22nd, Derek mentioning gambling debts exceeding $30,000. April 3rd, both boys asking when parents plan to retire. April 10th, research on methanol poisoning symptoms and detection methods. The word methanol was circled in red ink 3 times. Below it, Harold had written Marcus' debts in shaky handwriting. The final entry was dated 2 days before his death. "Be careful. Someone watching, boys acting strange, trust nobody completely." Evelyn's hands shook as she read Harold's final words. Her husband had suspected their sons of planning something sinister. Methanol poisoning would explain the explosion and burned facial features. The chemical burns would mask any evidence of deliberate poisoning. Harold had discovered their plot but couldn't escape in time. She Googled methanol poisoning on her ancient computer that night. The symptoms matched Harold's final weeks of unexplained illness perfectly. Headaches, nausea, confusion, vision problems, all dismissed as stress. He'd complained about feeling dizzy during his last garage shifts. But she'd attributed everything to age and financial worries naturally. Now she realized Harold had been slowly poisoned by someone. Someone with access to automotive chemicals and mechanical knowledge easily. Someone who knew his work schedule and safety protocols intimately. Someone who stood to benefit from $200,000. The insurance money would solve Marcus's real estate expansion problems. It would also pay off Derek's mounting gambling debts completely. Both sons had motive, opportunity, and access to deadly chemicals. Her own flesh and blood had murdered their father for money. The realization hit like lightning, splitting her world in half. Everything she'd believed about family loyalty was a dangerous lie. The boys she'd raised had become monsters wearing familiar faces. Harold's note wasn't a cruel hoax or grief-induced hallucination. Her husband was trying to warn her from beyond the grave. If he was somehow still alive, she had to find him. Before her sons realized, she knew their murderous secret truth. Detective Morrison closed Harold's case file with bureaucratic finality and indifference. Accidental death, carbon monoxide poisoning, case closed permanently, without further investigation. The police had no interest in elderly conspiracy theories or grief. Evelyn sat in the station lobby feeling completely abandoned by justice. If the law wouldn't help her, she'd become her own detective. She drove to Radio Shack and bought a small digital voice recorder. The teenage clerk showed her how to operate the tiny device. Press record, press stop, that's all you need to know. Evelyn practiced in her car until the buttons felt natural. Her arthritis made the small controls difficult, but not impossible. Harold deserved justice even if it meant betraying their sons. She invited Marcus and Derek over for Sunday dinner last week. The house felt empty without Harold's booming laughter-filling rooms. Marcus arrived in his black luxury sedan, checking his phone constantly. Derek stumbled in smelling like whiskey and broken dreams already. Both sons barely acknowledged the meal she'd spent hours preparing. Evelyn hid the recorder in her cardigan pocket, hands trembling. The device felt heavy as a loaded gun against her chest. Marcus dominated conversation with stories about his real estate empire. Another office complex, purchased another $1 million in his pocket. Derek sat silent, drinking Harold's whiskey from their wedding crystal. The alcohol loosened his tongue as the evening wore on. "Mom, you should consider moving closer to assisted living facilities. This house is too big for one person to maintain." Marcus nodded agreement while calculating property values in his head. "Dad's life insurance will cover the down payment for somewhere." Evelyn pressed record as casually as brushing away invisible crumbs. "Speaking of insurance, how did you boys know about the policy upgrade Harold supposedly signed weeks before his death?" Marcus answered smoothly, without missing a calculated corporate beat perfectly. "Dad mentioned wanting better coverage for your future security, Mom. He was always thinking ahead about protecting family financial interests. But Derek's military training made him terrible at civilian lies. If Dad hadn't died, where would we have gotten money to pay them back for all the debts piling up?" The words hung in the air like smoke from gunfire. Marcus shot his brother a look that could freeze hell. Derek realized his mistake and tried backtracking desperately but awkwardly. "I meant hypothetically, if something had happened to Dad eventually. But the damage was done, recorded forever on digital evidence." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs like caged birds fighting. Her own son had just confessed to murdering their father for money to pay gambling debts and business expansion loans. After dinner, she drove to Murphy's garage in the rain. Louise Henderson worked nights cleaning the automotive bays and offices. She'd known Harold for 20 years through union meetings. "Louise, I need to ask you about Harold's final weeks. Did he seem different? Worried? Scared about anything specific recently?" Louise set down her mop and studied Evelyn's desperate face. "Honey, your husband was terrified those last few months completely. He thought somebody was spiking his evening whiskey with something. Said it tasted bitter, made him dizzy and nauseous afterward. Harold started bringing his own bottle from home for safety. But even that didn't help his growing paranoia and suspicion. He was scared, Eve, real scared of somebody close. Never said who exactly, but family was mentioned several times. Your boys had been asking lots of questions about insurance. Harold felt like prey being circled by patient, hungry wolves. He even asked me to witness some papers he signed. But I was busy that day and told him later." Louise's words confirmed Evelyn's worst fears about her family. Harold had known someone was poisoning him slowly but surely. He tried to protect himself but couldn't escape their trap. The insurance papers were probably forged or signed under duress. Evelyn drove home through blinding tears and overwhelming rage simultaneously. Her sons had tortured their father before finally killing him. They'd watched him suffer, knowing they were causing his pain. All for money that would disappear as quickly as conscience. At home, she played Derek's confession on endless repeat. If Dad hadn't died, where would we have gotten money? To pay them back for all the debts piling up? Each word cut deeper than surgeons' scalpels through her heart. The boys she'd raised had become monsters, wearing familiar faces. They'd poisoned Harold slowly with methanol in his whiskey bottle, watched him grow sick, confused, desperate for medical answers, then staged an explosion to cover their methodical murder plot. The burned face ensured no autopsy would detect poison traces. The upgraded insurance policy doubled their murderous profit margin significantly. Marcus had handled all arrangements to control the investigation narrative. Derek provided military precision and emotional manipulation when needed effectively. Together, they'd executed the perfect patricide for financial gain, exclusively. But they'd underestimated their mother's love for Harold completely. Evelyn wiped her tears and stared at her reflection. The grieving widow was gone, replaced by something harder. If her sons had turned her into their enemy, then she'd show them what a mother's justice looked like. Harold's note had warned her about trusting family members. Now she understood why he'd hidden from his own sons. They'd probably threatened him before the final murder attempt succeeded. Made him upgrade the insurance policy under threat of violence. But Harold had escaped somehow, left clues for her discovery. The notebook, the strange withdrawals, the mysterious note, all connected. Her husband was still alive somewhere, hiding from their children. And she would find him before they realized their mistake. The tape recorder held enough evidence to destroy both sons. But first she needed to locate Harold and ensure safety. Then she'd bring down the empire built on their father's blood. Evelyn spent 3 sleepless nights researching Marcus's business empire online. Public records revealed a crumbling house of cards built on debt. Carter Development had defaulted on 4 major construction loans recently. 3 office complexes sat empty, bleeding money like open wounds. Marcus owed banks, investors, and private lenders over $12 million. His luxury lifestyle was financed entirely by borrowed money and lies. The black sedan was leased, the mansion mortgaged beyond its value. Even his expensive suits were purchased with corporate credit cards. Derek's gambling debts added another layer of desperate financial pressure. Atlantic City poker rooms had extended him credit beyond reason. His military disability checks couldn't cover minimum payments on debts. Loan sharks had started making threatening visits to his apartment. Both sons faced financial ruin without immediate cash infusion, miraculously. Harold's life insurance provided the perfect solution to their problems. $200,000 split between 2 increasingly desperate men. But murder required planning, execution, and cold-blooded calculation from both brothers. Evelyn invited them for another Sunday dinner, recorder hidden carefully. This time she prepared Harold's favorite pot roast and mashed potatoes. The smell filled the house with memories of happier family times. Marcus arrived late, phone pressed against his ear discussing foreclosures. Derek came drunk again, stumbling through the front door ungracefully. Both sons barely touched the meal she'd spent hours preparing. Evelyn waited until wine loosened their tongues in defensive guards. "Boys, I've been thinking about that insurance policy Harold signed. When exactly did he mention upgrading our coverage to you?" Marcus set down his fork with calculated corporate precision and control. "Mom, we've discussed this already. Dad wanted better family protection." But Evelyn pressed harder, watching their faces for revealing cracks. "It's just strange he never mentioned such an important decision. We talked about everything for 43 years of marriage constantly." Marcus's mask began slipping as irritation flashed across his features. All you need to do is sit still, Mom. Stop digging into things that don't concern you anymore at all. His voice carried an edge that made her blood freeze. This wasn't her son speaking, but a stranger wearing Marcus's face. Derek shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with his mother completely. The military discipline couldn't hide his guilt and growing paranoia. After they left, Evelyn searched Harold's belongings more thoroughly tonight. His old radio sat silent on the bedroom dresser. A vintage Zenith from their early marriage, still functional after decades. Harold had repaired it countless times rather than buying replacements. She'd heard him talking to it sometimes, practicing speeches. The radio felt heavier than usual when she lifted it. Something rattled inside the wooden cabinet like loose screws rolling. Evelyn found Harold's old screwdriver and carefully opened the back. Inside, taped to the speaker, was a small cassette recorder. Her hands trembled as she extracted the hidden device carefully. The tape was labeled in Harold's shaky handwriting with her name. "For my sunshine, in case something happens to me." She inserted the cassette into their old stereo system. Harold's voice filled the room like a ghost returning home. "If you're hearing this, sunshine, then they've done something terrible. I've been documenting everything for weeks in case I disappear. Marcus is drowning in debt. Derek owes dangerous people money. They've been asking questions about life insurance policies and inheritance. Last week, Marcus forced me to sign papers I couldn't read. Said it was just updating beneficiary information for family protection. But I recognized the insurance company letterhead and policy numbers. They doubled the payout without telling you or asking permission. Derek has been coming by the garage after hours recently. He brings whiskey and wants to talk about old times. But the alcohol tastes wrong, bitter, makes me sick afterward. I think they're poisoning me slowly with something in the bottle." Harold's voice cracked with fear and heartbreaking parental love simultaneously. "I wanted to fake my own death, test their loyalty, disappear for a while and see if they mourned properly. But the poison is working faster than I anticipated now. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone, especially them. They've planned this carefully, probably staged an accident at work. The insurance money will solve all their financial problems completely. But they'll come for you next if you get suspicious. Take this evidence to the police and get justice. I love you, sunshine. You were my whole world." The tape ended with Harold's labored breathing, and then silence. Evelyn collapsed onto their bed, clutching the cassette player tightly. Her husband had known he was dying but couldn't escape. He'd tried to warn her, protect her, give her weapons. But the methanol had reached his system before he could vanish. The explosion at Murphy's garage was carefully orchestrated murder theater. Marcus handled the paperwork to control the investigation and narrative. Derek provided the poison and military precision for the execution. Together they'd killed their father for $200,000. But Harold had outsmarted them from beyond the grave somehow. His hidden recording provided evidence of premeditation and conspiracy, clearly. The forced signature on insurance papers proved coercion and fraud. Documentation of the poisoning established method and timeline perfectly. Evelyn had everything needed to destroy both sons in court. But first, she needed to ensure her own safety. If they'd killed Harold for money, she was next. The grieving widow who asked too many inconvenient questions persistently. She packed Harold's evidence in a safety deposit box, made copies of everything and hid them with trusted friends. If anything happened to her, the truth would still emerge. Then she called Detective Morrison and requested an urgent meeting. It was time to bring down the empire built on blood. Evelyn had scheduled a meeting with Detective Morrison for tomorrow morning. Harold's evidence sat locked in the safety deposit box downtown. Copies of everything were hidden with her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Tonight, she planned to organize her thoughts and prepare testimony. But Marcus and Derek had discovered her investigation somehow mysteriously. The front door exploded inward at 11:30 p.m. without warning. Derek stumbled through the splintered wood, knife gleaming in moonlight. His eyes were wild with desperation and military-trained killing focus. Evelyn had been reading Harold's notebook at the kitchen table. She grabbed the digital recorder and pressed the red button. "Where is it, Mom? Where's all the evidence you collected?" Derek's voice slurred with alcohol and pharmaceutical enhancement clearly tonight. "We know you've been digging around asking questions about Dad." The knife blade caught hallway light as he approached her chair. Evelyn feigned weakness, hunching over like a helpless elderly victim. "I don't know what you're talking about, son. Please, calm." But her thumb pressed record as she spoke in trembling tones. "You killed him, didn't you? You poisoned your own father." Derek's military mask cracked completely under accusation and desperate panic. He charged forward with the knife raised above his head. Evelyn rolled sideways as the blade crashed into wooden tabletop. Harold's notebook scattered across the linoleum floor like fallen leaves. Derek lunged again, but his coordination was impaired by substances. Evelyn grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the stovetop. She swung with 67 years of suppressed maternal rage and betrayal. The pan connected with Derek's wrist, sending the knife flying. He stumbled backward, crashing into the refrigerator door violently. Blood pooled beneath his leg where glass fragments had pierced. The knife had bounced off the floor and cut him accidentally. Evelyn stood over her wounded son, breathing heavily from exertion. Instead of running, she grabbed kitchen towels from the counter. Maternal instinct overrode self-preservation as she knelt beside Derek. "Hold still, baby, you're bleeding too much. Let me help." She pressed clean towels against the spurting wound on his thigh. Derek stared at her with confusion and pharmaceutical-induced bewilderment completely. "You're helping me after I tried to kill you tonight." His voice carried wonder mixed with guilt and complete emotional breakdown. "You're still my son, no matter what you've done wrong." Evelyn's tears fell onto the towels as sirens wailed outside. She'd secretly dialed 911 when grabbing the emergency towels nearby. The phone lay open on speaker, broadcasting everything to dispatch. Marcus burst through the broken door wearing expensive running shoes. His luxury sedan idled in the driveway, with doors still open. "Mom, what the hell have you done to us tonight?" He saw Derek bleeding on the kitchen floor with evidence. Harold's notebook pages were scattered, like accusatory confetti everywhere around them. The digital recorder sat on the table, red light blinking. Marcus lunged for the device, but Evelyn was faster somehow. She clutched it against her chest like a protective shield. "This contains everything. All of Harold's warnings and your confessions. The police are coming and they'll hear every word clearly." Marcus grabbed her wrist, trying to wrestle the recorder away. But the 911 dispatcher had heard every word through the phone. Squad cars screeched into the driveway with flashing emergency lights. Officers poured through the front door with weapons drawn professionally. "Police, nobody move. Hands where we can see them now." Marcus released Evelyn and stepped backward with corporate surrender posture. Derek lay bleeding on the floor, mumbling about Daddy's whiskey. "I put the methanol in his bottle every night. He trusted me because I was his soldier boy. But the poison made him sick and we had to. Had to finish it at the garage before he figured." His confession poured out like blood from an opened wound. Officers tackled Marcus as he tried to flee through windows. His expensive suit tore as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Derek was loaded onto a stretcher, still confessing to paramedics. "We needed the money. Dad was worth more dead than." His voice faded as they wheeled him toward the ambulance. Evelyn collapsed into Harold's old recliner, sobbing uncontrollably now. The sons she'd raised had become monsters wearing familiar faces. They'd tortured their father, murdered him for insurance money deliberately, then tried to kill her when she discovered their secret. But Harold's evidence would ensure justice prevailed over family loyalty. Detective Morrison arrived as both sons were being transported away. "Mrs. Carter, We received the 911 call and heard everything. The recording device and Harold's notebook will provide crucial evidence. Evelyn handed over the digital recorder with shaking hands. This contains Derek's confession about poisoning Harold with methanol nightly. Marcus forced the insurance policy signature under threat of violence. They planned everything carefully, staged the garage explosion as cover. The detective took notes while paramedics checked Evelyn for injuries. She was physically unharmed but emotionally devastated beyond simple repair. 43 years of marriage, destroyed by greed and betrayal completely. The boys she'd sacrificed everything for had repaid her, with attempted murder and the loss of their father's life. But Harold's love had protected her from beyond the grave. His hidden evidence and warnings had saved her tonight miraculously. Justice would be served even though family was forever broken. The insurance money would never touch her hands or conscience. She'd donate every penny to victims of violent family crimes. Turn their blood money into something Harold would approve of. The sirens faded as police cars carried her sons away. Evelyn sat alone in the wreckage of her destroyed home. But for the first time since Harold's funeral, she felt not peace exactly, but the possibility of healing eventually. The trial began 6 months after that bloody night in September. Evelyn walked into the courthouse wearing Harold's favorite black dress. The media called her case the family murder trial of the decade. Reporters lined the courthouse steps like vultures awaiting fresh carrion. Inside, Marcus sat in his orange jumpsuit, calculating and cold. His expensive lawyers argued temporary insanity and financial duress desperately. But Harold's hidden recording destroyed their carefully constructed defense strategy. Derek appeared broken, mumbling apologies between pharmaceutical-induced seizures and withdrawal. Military psychiatrists testified about his PTSD and gambling addiction problems. But premeditated murder couldn't be excused by mental health issues. The prosecution played Harold's cassette tape for the packed courtroom. His voice filled the room like a ghost demanding justice. "If you're hearing this, Sunshine, then they've done something terrible." Evelyn wept openly as her husband warned from beyond death. The jury listened in horrified silence to Harold's final words. Evidence mounted like storm clouds gathering before devastating tornadoes strike. Financial records showed Marcus facing bankruptcy without insurance money immediately. Derek's gambling debts exceeded his military disability payments by thousands. The forced insurance signature proved coercion and fraud beyond doubt. Digital recordings captured both sons confessing to murder and conspiracy. Harold's notebook documented the methanol poisoning over several weeks methodically. Louise testified about Harold's paranoia and fear of family betrayal. The garage explosion was carefully staged to hide poisoning evidence. Every piece fit together like a jigsaw puzzle of betrayal. Defense attorneys argued for mercy, citing childhood trauma and pressure. But the prosecution painted a picture of cold-blooded family murder. 2 sons who valued money more than their father's life. The trial lasted 8 brutal weeks of testimony and evidence. Evelyn testified for 3 days about discovering the conspiracy slowly. She described finding Harold's hidden cassette with trembling voice clearly. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours total time. Guilty on all counts of first-degree murder and insurance fraud. Marcus received life in prison without possibility of parole ever. Derek got life but with potential parole after 30 years. The judge called it the most heartbreaking case of betrayal. 2 weeks after sentencing, Derek was found dead in solitary. He'd hanged himself with bedsheets during the midnight shift change. The suicide note contained rambling apologies to Harold and Evelyn. "I'm sorry, Mom, I never meant for it to go. So far, I loved Dad, but the debts were crushing me, and Marcus said it would be easy. Just a little poison in his whiskey every night. We thought he'd just get sick and die naturally. The explosion was Marcus's idea to hide the evidence completely. I'm sorry, I can't live with this." Evelyn received the note through her lawyer the following week. She cried for 3 days straight, mourning both husband and son. Marcus spiraled into complete madness within 6 months of imprisonment. Guards found him talking to invisible visitors in his cell. He'd draw Harold's face on the walls with stolen pencils. "Dad, I'm sorry, the money was supposed to fix everything." "Why won't you forgive me? I'm still your boy." The prison psychiatrist diagnosed severe psychotic breakdown with guilt-induced hallucinations. Marcus spent his days muttering to Harold's imaginary ghost constantly. The empire he'd built collapsed completely without his corporate guidance. Creditors seized every property, every luxury, every symbol of success. His mansion sold at auction for a fraction of value. The black sedan was repossessed by the leasing company immediately. Everything Marcus had killed for turned to dust and shame. Evelyn inherited the $200,000 insurance payout reluctantly, but she refused to spend a single penny on herself. The blood money felt cursed, tainted by Harold's murder and suffering. Instead, she established the Harold Carter Memorial Fund for victims. Every dollar went to families destroyed by violent domestic crimes. Counseling services, legal aid, emergency housing, educational scholarships for orphans. The fund grew as donations poured in from across the nation. People were inspired by her transformation of tragedy into hope. Newspapers called her the Iron Widow of Philadelphia with admiration, the woman who brought down her own sons for justice. But Evelyn felt no pride in the media attention at all. She'd lost her husband, both sons, and her faith in family. The victory tasted like ashes and broken dreams constantly now. 1 year after the trial ended, she sat alone again. The courthouse was empty, except for echoing footsteps and memories. She clutched Harold's faded wedding photo against her trembling chest. His smile looked frozen in time, forever young and trusting. "I did it, Harold. I brought them to justice like you. Wanted me to do with all that evidence you left. But the cost was everything we built together for life. Our boys are gone, one dead, one insane with guilt. Was justice worth destroying what remained of our family completely?" Harold's photo offered no answers, just silent reproach and sadness. The courthouse security guard approached with respectful, gentle concern clearly. "Ma'am, we're closing up now. Can I walk you out?" Evelyn nodded and stood on unsteady legs that felt ancient. Outside, Philadelphia's autumn wind scattered leaves like broken promises everywhere. She walked toward her car, thinking about Harold's final words. "As long as we have each other, sunshine, home is wherever." But now she had no one left, except memories and ghosts. The insurance money would help other families survive violent betrayal. But it couldn't bring back Harold or heal her shattered heart. Justice had been served, but love remained forever, buried deep, in a grave that should have held only one victim. Instead of claiming 3 souls from the same broken family, 5 years had passed since the courthouse steps and media cameras. Evelyn lived now in a modest cottage outside Philadelphia's bustling center. The blue shutters needed paint, but the mortgage was paid off. Harold's insurance money had purchased this sanctuary and eternal peace. Not for her comfort, but as headquarters for his memorial fund. Every morning she woke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains. The same patterns Harold had admired in their first apartment together. She'd salvaged them from the house Marcus forced them to sell. Small treasures that connected her to happier, more innocent times. The backyard had been transformed into something magical and healing. Where weeds once choked the soil, flowers now danced with joy. Sunflowers towered like golden sentinels protecting her sacred garden space. Roses climbed wooden trellises Harold would have built with pride. Lavender and jasmine perfumed the air with hope and renewal. She'd planted every seed herself, nurturing life from barren earth. The neighbors called her Grandma Eve without asking her permission. Children knocked on her door seeking cookies and bedtime stories. Tommy from next door helped water the sunflowers every evening. 8-year-old Sarah brought drawings of butterflies and rainbow houses. These weren't her grandchildren by blood, but something more precious. Bonds formed through choice, kindness, and unconditional love freely given. The Harold Carter Memorial Fund had grown beyond her wildest dreams. Donations arrived daily from people inspired by her story nationwide. Families torn apart by violence found healing through Harold's legacy. Counseling centers, safe houses, legal aid, educational scholarships for survivors. Every dollar spent in Harold's memory created ripples of hope. Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor, became her closest friend and confidant. They shared morning coffee and evening walks through the peaceful neighborhood. Louise from Murphy's Garage visited monthly with updates and laughter. She'd retired but still brought stories from the automotive world. Dr. Williams, the family counselor, helped her navigate grief and guilt. Sessions taught her that survival wasn't betrayal of Harold's memory. Building new happiness honored his love better than endless mourning. Wednesday evenings brought her quilting circle to the living room. 7 women who'd survived their own family tragedies and violence. They stitched together stories, tears, and threads of healing simultaneously. Each quilt donated to domestic violence shelters carried their combined love. Saturday mornings meant volunteering at the community center downtown. Evelyn taught elderly residents how to tend small garden plots. Watching their faces bloom with accomplishment filled her wounded heart. Harold would have loved seeing joy grow from soil and seeds. Sunday afternoons were reserved for Harold's harmonica music lessons. She'd found his old instrument in the garage after everything. Learning to play his favorite songs felt like conversations beyond death. Amazing grace flowed through her lips like whispered prayers and promises. The neighborhood children gathered on her porch for evening concerts. Their giggles mixed with melodies in perfect harmony of innocence. Tommy clapped along while Sarah hummed in her sweet voice. These moments felt like family dinners from decades long past. On quiet nights, Evelyn sat in Harold's old recliner. She'd saved it from their house sale, despite Marcus's corporate protests. The fabric was worn but still smelled faintly of his cologne. Here she read letters from fund recipients sharing their healing. Maria from California wrote about escaping her abusive husband safely. David from Texas described putting his children through college programs. Each story proved Harold's death hadn't been completely meaningless, after all. Pain transformed into purpose, created light from the deepest darkness possible. Sometimes, Marcus's letters arrived from the psychiatric hospital ward. His handwriting was childlike, filled with apologies and delusions constantly. "Mom, I see Dad sometimes in the cafeteria during lunch. He says he forgives me, but I know that's just my guilt talking because I killed him. I'm sorry. I love you. Please visit me." Evelyn never responded but kept every letter carefully filed away. Her son was still alive but lost to madness and regret. Forgiveness would come eventually, but healing required more time and patience. The garden provided therapy better than any prescription medication could offer. Each morning brought new blooms and small miracles of natural growth. Spring brought tulips and daffodils pushing through winter's frozen resistance. Summer exploded with roses, sunflowers, and children's delighted laughter constantly. Fall painted the maples red while mums bloomed in cheerful defiance. Winter brought peace and planning for next year's expanded flower beds. The cycle continued, reliable as Harold's love had once been. One perfect October evening, Evelyn sat among her sunflower giants. The setting sun turned their faces gold like Harold's warm smile. Children's voices carried from nearby yards where families gathered for dinner. Normal families with normal problems and normal love shared freely. She pulled out Harold's wedding photo, edges soft with constant handling. "Hello, sunshine," he seemed to whisper through autumn wind and memories. "I never imagined this when I left you that note. All the pain, the trials, the loss, but look around. You've built something beautiful from the ashes of our broken family." Tommy ran through the garden, chasing butterflies with pure joy. Sarah picked flowers for her mother's kitchen table with careful reverence. Mrs. Patterson waved from her window while preparing evening tea. This was family now, chosen through love rather than blood. Real family is about love and justice, not DNA and obligation. I lost everything I thought mattered in this world completely. But from the ashes, flowers still bloom with impossible beauty. Harold would be proud of the garden and the fund. Most of all, he'd be proud that his sunshine found light. Even after the darkest night nearly destroyed her will to live. A gentle breeze moved through the sunflowers like Harold's final blessing. Golden petals caught the dying light and danced with eternal hope. Family isn't about blood running through shared veins in history. Family is about love freely given and justice courageously pursued. In that truth, Evelyn had found peace at last.